test. We did the mics right. We did it.
Took a minute.
We're new. Oh my gosh, I'm so excited to get to sit down with you. I can't believe just really the opportunity to be able to sit down with such an incredible author, with such a remarkable book. If everyone has not read it, please get your copy in hand. You're joining us in Spokane. Have you ever been here before?
As a child, I haven't been here in many, many years, and I was just telling my partner when we arrived early this afternoon, I was like, wow, I haven't been here since I was a kid. And we walked around downtown, like checked into our hotel, and I was like, Spokane is cute. Like, our hotel is beautiful, and like, so it's been a long time, but I'm into it.
Yes, it was a best kept secret. It's no longer best kept secret, as we can see from the housing prices, but yes, welcome, welcome, I'm glad you're here. Oh my gosh, we got a chance to visit a little bit before.
They had to break us apart.
They had to break us apart, it's true. If you were in the VIP room, I apologize, I hogged the star. But what I really appreciated was, just now the little bit of the mashup in our two works, and just some of the like zine kind of starters of what we've created, this sort of DIY approach. And so I'm gonna queue up into a few questions here soon, but I would love at first just to hear like, what was it like to be able to do something that winds up looking like this as opposed to work in the Xerox machine and like cutting and gluing and pasting something to create sort of a paper creation that you're going to be selling with other merch while you're on the road.
Right, and for those of you who were not backstage with us, like I got so excited hearing about your own journey and your book and how you had done like the sandwich fold zine, and all of a sudden just everything started firing off in me. I was like, oh, this is a kindred spirit. So like to know that like that's how it started, like right, the DIY, do-it-yourself like mentality of, I created a zine while I was doing an artist residency in Seattle because the director of the program kind of said, you can do whatever you want. And I was like, wait, really? And they were like, yeah, and like, make a zine if you want to. And I was like, oh my gosh. They're like, here's the paper. And then and here I was like post-grad school, cutting and pasting. And it was just this very kind of rough, put together thing. And then to have that, my book of poetry is coming out next year with Milkweed, and it started as this little stapled zine, and I did take it on the road, and I, sold it for $2 or traded it for another band's merch, and to know that that will kind of be a book in the world is something that you know about too, and that's so exciting to me.
Absolutely, yeah. I just love that you had mentioned that sort of you still had a copy of your own, but it's like that dog-eared sort of like been stuffed at the bottom of the backpack version, and that's me as well, where I'm like, baby speak Salish, I'm like, the original zine, I'm like, I think I have part of that somewhere, so that's beautiful. Well, I want to be able to ask you some questions about your book, and I really had to work to not have too many spoilers, and you're going to get to enjoy a reading as well, but we're going to start off with a little bit of discussion. And one of the first questions that I had was really specifically something that struck me is this piece around this ancestral autobiography. And I was like, whoa, ancestral autobiography, I like that. And it seemed to me sort of like, wow, that could be a genre in and of itself. So tell me what that genre would be, and tell me sort of what else you would like to see other artists put out in the world in that genre.
Right, and I think that it's a wild title, right? The Ancestral Autobiography. It is kind of wild. It's like, what exactly is that? And I think for me, when I think of the word autobiography versus memoir, autobiography usually sort of points to the lived experiences of a person of interest or a historical. It's literally a retelling of their lives, born lived experiences, all of that. But it's usually a historical figure, a celebrity, a person of interest. That's why we read them, right? Because they're so interesting. And then versus a memoir is zooms in on deeply personal moments, right? Something the writer has gone through, something the writer has grown from. And so I knew that my book existed somewhere in the middle. Like it couldn't just be a memoir, and it couldn't be just autobiography. The Ancestral Autobiography allows it the space I think it needed to be my own story as a Coast Salish woman, as a survivor, and it's in there, but rooted with it are the stories of my ancestors and the women of my family, and I knew that it was also their story as much as mine. And so Ancestral Autobiography kind of allowed the space to dip into their stories and then come back to my own narrative at times. And I want to see way more books like that. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know, it's something that I get excited about, where it's like sharing your experiences, particularly like something that was challenging, but also the experiences of the folks who came before you, and how you walk with that through the world, I think can be really, really moving. And so I want to see more ancestral autobiographies. I hope more come.
I do too, and I really thank you for like making that invitation, because I feel like even just putting it out there into the world as this sort of, as you know, you've named it the Ancestral Autobiography. It is this invitation for other writers to frame it in that way. And I think there are many like super rad Native authors who've definitely recognized or have brought in the ways in which their story is the story of the previous generation, the generation before that, the generation before that, and the ways in which there's something you want to be able to move towards in terms of how that generation, the next generation and on, really can then interact with that story and the healing that goes on along the way.
Right. I think that as Native authors and artists, it's impossible not to like include that, you know, as like our identity, part of like what we've, I don't know, I mean, now I'm speaking for my own personal self, but like it would be impossible to tell this story without telling theirs as well.
Well, I want to recognize too that something as Native authors that I like really, and just as Native people, that I feel like I didn't get to tell you backstage, is just that I've had so much respect for your family for a long time, because I lived over in Seattle and I had the absolute pleasure of just on a couple occasions getting to meet your great-great-grandmother. And when I was a student, we were working really hard to bring Tuffley Wald, the intellectual house, to campus. And she was a monumental elder in being able to make sure that that happened, but happened in the right way, and that we had the right name for it. And so she just was such a patient person with kind of all of us kids, that then we're sort of really looking to her for how we needed to be able to carve that space out in an institution. So I just want to say that there's some connections there.
That's so amazing to hear. Also, like, just love hearing about the work that she did outside of just what I directly experienced. Like, patient, she was a patient woman. She was also a total badass, you know?
100%.
So thank you for sharing that.
Absolutely. I have my little notebook here. I write in a journal every day, and that happens to be where my questions for you also live. So
I love that.
I will open it up. So my next question is, you know, in your book, you introduce us to 3 really powerful female ancestors, and you bring us to the very places that they lived. You bring us, like, really the sense of place is so strong in your writing. So, like, I felt like I was there on the beach, you know, just like hip deep in water with your great-great-grandmother, or being able to see through the eyes of Kamsha, and to the river that Susie would go to. So tell us how these stories became so real and so present for you, and what the process of recreating these moments for an audience of readers was like.
Also, I love this question. I loved all your questions, but this one too, because of it being so place specific, that I think for a lot of the times, and in the book, you know, I think I only go to Kamsha's once, but it's a place that I returned to so many times. I went back again and again. In the container of red paint, I think I only include one memory of going back there, but it's a place I visited many times. as well as the Skagit River, the Nooksack River. And these places are places that I would return to physically, but also having moved away to go to college in New Mexico, and then later to, travel, go on tour, visit my partner in California. Whenever I'm away, these places are so, they're still in me. I'll dream about them. I literally dream about them. And so I think it comes from a place of having physically been to these sites, like standing in front of Compsh's home, walking around Cape Disappointment and Dead Man's Cove. They're just it's such a visceral memory for me every time I'm there. When I go back to where I grew up in Swinomish, being at, I think I talk about it in the book too, but there's this sort of it's what I feel the most homesick for whenever I travel, but when there's the forest pushed up right against like the tree line, right against the ocean, like right against like a gray stony beach, I dream of that again and again. And so those places show up on the page as physical characters almost. I think I totally derailed from answering that, but
no, I think you're there. I mean, they're physical characters because these are relationships. These are really deep relationships that you have in your lifetime, but also that go so many generations back, right? I mean, we're talking about the places not just that belonged to people in your family, but the places they belonged to, right? So there's this real relationship. I think it's so present in your writing.
And I think too that some of it comes from like that, yes, I grew up going to these places and I went again and again, but I think I can also speak to like the research part of it when I went into physically going to, I got a small grant to go to El Waco, to go to like the Chinook region where Kamsha lived, and like a ton of extensive research about, my mom gave me a ton of our family, like she had a big folder for me that was full of like letters and correspondences between ancestors and old newspaper clippings, and then falling down a rabbit hole of like historical texts that were oftentimes kind of a bummer, but then being able to place those with my physical memory of these places is kind of what. Did I answer him?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, well, and also I'm just like, I love the way in which it's sort of like you have family that, your great-great-grandmother like traveled this river, went up and down. It's just sort of like, as you're cruising I-5 and as you're, right, like you're like on the Black River of just like going up and down and really moving in the same patterns in your lifetime as well. Very cool. Just so cool. So as a Coast Salish Punk, is there anything you've learned about your ancestors or learned in traditional stories that has made you think that that's so punk?
Definitely. And this was one of the questions when I was looking over them. I was like, can me and this person please be friends? I'm like, this is the best question.
Yeah, please.
And this is so wild because I had never thought of it, which seems so like, I'd never actually considered that, and I think it was a really exciting thing to ruminate on. But absolutely, I think growing up with my great-grandmother and seeing all of the work she did, the language revitalization work, to me reads as a kind of activism, right? And to see how she worked so hard to sort of like literally challenge an erasure, an attempted erasure of language and of culture, that is so punk. And doing things like, I think back in when I was in my early 20s, she commissioned a symphony and had some folks being like, we don't know if this is a good idea. My great-grandmother was in her 80s at the time, and she was like, I don't care. And she called up this composer and said, hi, I'd like you to commission this symphony. And the composer said, I'm really busy, that sounds really interesting, but I don't think I can do that. And then for 2 weeks afterwards, this composer couldn't get my great-grandmother's voice out of his head and caved and said, all right. And my great-grandmother, being kind of this bossy, old, amazing powerhouse of a woman, got her way. Like, they told her no, and she was like, no. I mean, there's nothing more punk than that, sort of challenging these, and on a deeper level too, like growing up, to consider all of the things that she worked so hard to preserve like language and stories and culture in the face of, you know, settler colonial trauma and challenging these like, you know, systems of oppression and control. Like that was pretty punk.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think of like her time on the UW campus, and there's this sort of like crawling to the very like heart of a monster and being like, you will listen to me and there will be space for me here. Yeah, it's beautiful. I'm glad you liked that question, because I also, in reading, like there was just different, like when you talked about the Deception Pass, and there's a story there that is something that has been an inspiration to you as well, where I was just like, that's so punk. Like, I've never heard of this. I've never seen this amazing carving, but yeah.
I remember the day my great-grandmother told me that story for the first time, I was 6, and I was obsessed with The Little Mermaid, like, painfully obsessed. And I was telling her, I think I sat her down, and I was like, you're a storyteller? Me too. And I sat her down and play by play told her the entire Disney, like the songs and everything. And you know, you mentioned her being a patient woman, and wow, she really was, because she listened to all of it. And then she turned to me and she goes, you know, we have our own story of a sea maiden. And she told me the story of the Maiden of Deception, and it blew my brain, right? I was just like, oh my God, like, and then I immediately became very enamored with this story. Also very, there's some punk in there, you know, there's a defiance, and also for a greater cause. There's like, if those of you who don't know the story of the Maiden of Deception Pass, you should find it and enjoy it. It's incredible. And even just, this question got me so excited, I've been thinking about it for 2 days.
Oh, please, feel free to add on. Yeah, feel free.
I think the last thing I'll say about it is even just yesterday I'm working on some essays, and that again require me to dig into research and like pull out the big folder and pull out my great-grandmother's books. One of them, Habu, is a collection of Coast Salish stories and legends that she had transcribed to English. And at the very end of the book, I found this like sneaky little story that just really rattled me in a good way, called Wild Blackberries. And it was this just a few lines long, just about the wild blackberries, how they used to be pale in color and bitter. And basically, I mean, I don't need to tell you the whole story, but it was about like sort of a thwarted romance and the passion and the longing shown down on the blackberries. I closed the book and I was like, that's punk, like that's feminist, like, you know, it was so, it still shows up.
Oh, it shows up, and it sounds like we need to also like go to a few other books that have been created by people in your family too, to get to learn more, for sure. My next question, so your Uncle Ron also plays a really important role in your story, and actually this is another little like me being a really big fan of your family, because I took a Pacific Northwest, what was it? Native Art of the Pacific Northwest course. And so his work was featured in that class. And some of that was, you know, he's an artist known for depictions of longhouse dancers, which also, like, I have to hit pause and be like, I love your sort of, like, it's not this necessarily, but your, like, intellectual property, like, at the beginning of this book, being able to sort of say, like, I have gone about understanding what's appropriate to share and what's not appropriate to share. And if anyone asks of me to share something that's not appropriate, like, nope, I know where the lines are. And so, first of all, I really like that. Okay, unpause, unfreeze. So he had these depictions of longhouse dancers, and something that I'm not sure if anyone else has really depicted, like that was my first like knowledge of it, and he had a really good reason to do so. He had purpose in it, and at the same time, some would say he took a really big risk in doing that, and I'm sure that that was challenging in his lifetime. What are the risks that you took in your healing process and in writing this book? And what kind of guidance and support did you have around those decisions?
When thinking of my Uncle Ron and thinking of those beautiful like paintings and their intensity, and they're, you know, they're really large. They're in my living room now, and I have to admire, like, and I love that you brought this up because it's a really good parallel, right? I think when he set out to do those paintings, he talked to my great-grandmother first. And in a similar way, I went to my parents when I first finished the draft of Red Paint, before I let editors read it or even friends or trusted readers. I gave it to my parents because I knew that I had to, and they knew that I was working on a project. They knew what it was about, but I sort of brought it to them and said, I need you guys to read this, and they did. And my mom definitely highlighted some areas where she was like, no, you need to take that out. And I did without question, right? I was like, oh, okay. And we talked it out, and I was like, that makes sense. I get it. And then later it was interesting to see, certain mentors or editors, be going through trying to help edit, and they were like, you're really vague right here. Can you go into that? And it was often difficult to kind of push back against and go, no, I can't. And then they push a little bit. Well, I think the reader needs to understand. I was like, do you want to get my mom on the phone right now? Like, she will shut this down. And so I think having that accountability and that responsibility to know that I had to go to my parents and to at least share it with them and to listen to them when they said that what would be respectful and what wouldn't, and to really have that as part of my writing process throughout the editing. And did I answer that one?
What a gift, yeah. Oh yeah, like what a gift to have your parents there to be able to like stand as those guides, and also to be really like deep into your story. There's a lot of vulnerability here. And so, I mean, sometimes it's hard because like it's enough to kind of like unveil that mirror and face the vulnerability yourself, and to know that in some ways I feel like it might be potentially easier for an anonymous audience to then face that, as opposed to like, here's my family, here's my parents, and this is what I'm bringing into the world.
Right, I feel like too, I gave my parents like such a tremendous assignment, right, in doing so. And my mom, she was like, I need to read it first, and I was like, I know. And then to think about that assignment, that like ask that I was making, like, can you make sure that I am not going out of my lane? But then to also consider them as my parents, and to be like, oh yeah, FYI, it's kind of a bummer, maybe. That was and my parents are incredible, and they are fierce and super strong, but they definitely were like, your book was very hard for us at times. And I was like, I know. Thank you. Thank you for reading it.
Yeah, thanks for being a witness to it, right? And I feel grateful just to get to bear witness to your story too, and that's a responsibility in our communities, bearing witness. And it's something that I think you've written something that can bring so much strength and so much meaning as people are really looking back through their family histories, as well as making sense of just their own lived experience. So
thank you.
I just think it's beautiful.
That's the hope.
Okay, this is kind of the last of my questions that I have written out here, but I love getting to visit with other Native authors, or honestly just other Native folks in general, about favorite authors, favorite books that are out there, and sort of your suggested reading. And I know you're teaching as well, and you've taught a good deal, and so what are your like must be on your Indigenous bookshelf? I have like a color-coded, things got weird in the pandemic.
I color-coded my books too.
Yes!
It looks phenomenal.
It looks so pretty. It's so satisfying.
It's like an art installation in my office.
Yeah, totally. There's some baskets, and then there's just a rainbow. Yeah. Okay, so we're on the same page. We're still going to be best friends. That's great. I'm really excited about that. But what are your like big recommendations?
It was funny when I was discussing this with my partner. I was like, and this one, and this one, and this one, and they kind of said, "What was Sasha? I think that you were only asked for 3." And I was like, "Oh, right." So this is obviously something I get very excited about. But I think it's impossible not to think of Native authors that I really love and admire and take a lot of inspiration from without thinking of Deborah Erling Magpie.
Yes!
Why do I know each other before now?
Her friend? Yes!
Louise White Owl?
Yeah!
Oh my God.
Yeah! Have you ever driven through Dixie?
No.
Have you done like a Montana?
No.
Okay, well, all right, we can go.
Road trip.
Yeah, front road trip. Yeah. Summer's looking good.
But that book was so monumental for me in my undergrad, and I've reread it several times. I think her writing is really beautiful and really poignant, and the character of Louise White Owl alone, just like her immense power and and strength. And I mean, she's a survivor, and it's just so beautifully written. I'm waiting for the movie. I'm like, please, someone make this a movie. So Perma Red is absolutely one of my all-time favorites. I'm also reading a lot of Joan Leviathan. She was my former professor, mentor, now friend, and has several collections of really beautiful poetry. And what I love about her work is there's this like staunch feminism there, but coming from an indigenous lens. And she also uses her traditional language. Like she'll have a poem on the page, and then you flip the page and it's the same poem in Inupiaq. And I think that it's so beautiful to engage in, even though I don't speak Inupiaq, but to even just see those letters on the page is incredible. I love Joan Leviathan.
Everyone's taking notes, right?
Yeah, right. And I just reread this for maybe the third time. It's a novel by a Native Hawaiian author called Sharks in the Time of Saviors, and it is one of my favorite books on the entire planet. It came out, I think, 2 years ago, or maybe even just last year. Time is weird now. But Sharks in the Time of Saviors, and it's a beautiful novel. He grew up on the Big Island. I was spending some time there with my partner, and my agent sent me this book and was like, you're on the Big Island right now, like you need to read this. And it was just so beautifully done, so unapologetically indigenous in its themes, like really digging into the recent colonization of the Hawaiian Islands, its impact that it's had on not only the Native Hawaiian families there, but the environment, and also just how like he brings in some of his Native Hawaiian legends into this very contemporary family of like Native Hawaiian folks living on the Big Island, and it's so beautiful. It might be my all-time favorite book.
I love that piece around place.